Hi, in this video we'll configure server-side pagination, sorting and filtering, and on the screen you can see two projects. They're exactly the same projects, but on the left side you can see it's running on a different port. So our left project is configured with the client-side pagination, sorting and filtering, and on the right side our project is configured with the server-side pagination, sorting and filtering. Let's look at those applications one by one. I'm going to open Developer Tools. You can press F12 or Ctrl-Shift-I. That's what I'm doing right now. And if you're not on this Network tab, make sure you're there. I'm going to refresh the page. And as you can see, I have this HTTP call, so I'm going to click on it. Let me make it a little wider. And I'm going to click on Headers. And this is my call. And what I'm doing, I'm loading all data from my database using Web API. And my response, I'm getting a lot of data. It's all 1000 records. And after that, when I page through this data, as you can see, there are no other calls. All data is already running on the client side, so it's all in the memory. And Angular material table is doing all the work. Here I can also sort, and I can filter my data or search my data. Let's now look at the other application that we're going to build together, where pagination, sorting and filtering are configured a little different. This is the application we're going to build, and I'm going to open the Developer Tools again. And let me refresh the page. As you can see, our Web API call looks a little different. Let me click on it. On the Headers tab, you can see that we're calling a different endpoint. It's called Contacts by Page, and we are passing some query parameters. So we are passing page index, page size, sort column, sort order, and filter value. Filter value is an empty string because this search bar is empty. So let's see what happens if we start going page by page. I'm gonna click next page. We get data, but when we look at our response, instead of getting all data, we are just getting 5 records that is displayed on this page. Let me change items per page to 10. And you can see our response change to 10 records. Let me go back to 5 so we can see it better. Let me clear it. Now if I sort by either first name or last name, as you can see again, we are getting just 5 records for this page. After we did it, we can start paging through the data. But as you can see, our sorting rule is still there. So we're sorting by last name. And if you look at our call, here our sort column is last name. Now let's look at our filtering option. So let me type a name. As you can see, we have 9 records total. So I can page through this data. So there are only 2 pages. And the second page has only 4 records. And I can also sort it. Let me sort it by first name. And it was ascending. Now let's sort it again. And now it's descending. And same thing we can do with the last name. So that's what we're building today. And if you already have this application from the last video, you can just continue working on it. But if you didn't follow the last tutorial and you want to do it, you can load both Angular application and .NET Web API application from the GitHub repositories, and I'm gonna put the links in the description of this video. Let's briefly look at our endpoints inside our .NET Web API project. This is our endpoint that we were using in the previous video when we get all contacts, and this is our new endpoint that we're gonna create in this video. We're gonna start configuring our Web API, so I'm gonna load the old project and start modifying it. This is our Web API project, and as you can see we have just one controller, context controller, and right now we just have this endpoint all contacts. So we're gonna create another one, and to make it easy I'm just copy paste and we'll modify it. I'm gonna press Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, and instead of all contacts, let's call it contacts by page. We're also gonna have 5 parameters, so let's put them here. So the first one is gonna be page index, and it's gonna be an integer. Next one is going to be page size, and it's how many records we want to display on one page. Let's call it page size, and it's also going to be an integer. Next parameter is sort column, and it's going to be a column by which we're going to sort our data. So if it's first name, we're going to sort by first name. If it's last name, we're going to sort by last name. So let's call it sort column, and it's going to be string. Next one, sort order, so it's going to be either descending or ascending. And the last parameter will be the filter value parameter. So that's our search parameter, and it's coming from our search bar on the page. So it's going to be also a string, and we're going to call it a filter value. Now let's make the three last parameters optional. So I'm going to put question mark here, here, and here, and it means that they're not required. Next, let's modify this line, and we're gonna call a different method. We don't have this method yet, so let's call it get context by page. And inside we're gonna pass all these parameters. So it's gonna be all in order: page index, page size, sort column, sort order, and filter value. Let me save it. And I misspelled here, let me fix that. And now we need to go inside this context service and create this method. Let me copy it, Control C. Let me go to Solution Explorer and go inside our service folder, and I'm gonna open this context service. Let me put the name here on the comment for now. So this is the name of our new method. So let me just copy paste this, and we're gonna modify it. So our new name will be get context by page. So I'm gonna replace this, and this method is gonna take these 5 values. So I'm gonna actually go back to our controller, and I'm gonna grab all this, Control C. Let's go back. I'm gonna put it here, Control V. So I don't need this line anymore. I'm gonna just press Control X. And now let's start getting data from the database. So on line 28, we're getting all data from the database, and we are placing it inside this variable context. And if you point at this variable, you can see that the type of this variable is the list of contact objects. We're getting a list after we execute this command to list async, and this is where we're actually going inside the database and extract all the data. This line of code is pretty straightforward, and it's very simple. But when we start getting data page by page, we need to do a little bit more work. So we're gonna completely change how we get data from the database. Let me comment this out. I'm gonna make some space. And here I'm gonna start building a query. I'm gonna create a variable. So I'm gonna say var, and I'm gonna call it query equal, and I'm gonna say again db context, and I'm gonna say context. And here I'm gonna use select, and I'm gonna say I want all my contacts. I can call it anything I want. Very often you just see one letter, for example C, but I want to be very explicit, so I'm gonna say contacts, contacts, semicolon. And now if I point on this variable query, as you can see, instead of type list, I have a type iQueryable. So right now we're just building a query. We're not going inside our database and getting all data. Next, let's filter our data by this filter value. As you remember, this value can be null. So let's make sure we check this value for null or empty string. There are a couple ways you can do it. I'm gonna put an if statement. And here I'm gonna say filter value. If it's not null and filter value, we're gonna trim it to make sure there's no white space. And I'm gonna check for length. And I'm gonna see if length's bigger than 0. There's another way to do it. So we can replace these two conditions with just one condition. And what we can do, we can say string is null or empty. And in parentheses, I'm gonna put this filter value. And of course, we need to put an exclamation mark in front of it, because we're checking here if it's not null or empty, we're gonna do something here. So now we're gonna continue building on top of this query. So we're gonna say again query equals query, and we're gonna have a where statement. And now instead of contact, we're gonna say just C, first name. And if we don't want to depend on up and lowercase, let's convert everything to lowercase. So I'm gonna be using toLow method, and I'm gonna say contains. As you can see, Visual Studio is helping me. And here I'm gonna do an OR statement, so 2 pipes. And I'm gonna just copy the whole thing, this part, Control C, I'm gonna put it here, Control V. I'm gonna replace first name with last name. So we're searching by first or last name. So it's gonna be last name. Again, our query is still a type of iQueryable. And next, let's use our sort column. So for that, we're gonna use a switch statement. And I'm gonna start typing switch. And it's a snippet, so I'm gonna press tab one more time. And inside parentheses, we're gonna put sort column. So let's start the first case. So I'm gonna just type case, colon, and inside quotation mark, I'm gonna put first name. I'm gonna put another column, and I'm sorry, this column, we actually don't need it. Enter. And if our sort column is first name, our query is gonna look like this. So we're gonna say order by. And inside, let's use the same letter, C for contact. So we're gonna say C first name. And at the end, we need to put break. So that's going to be our first case. Now we need to decide how we're gonna sort it, descending or ascending. Right now, the default right here we put, it's gonna be ascending. And since we're gonna have just two options, either descending or ascending, let's use a ternary operator and put everything in one line here. So the way we can do it, our if condition is gonna look like that. So if our sort order, and here I need to put two equal signs, and in quotation marks I'm gonna say descending. And this is not coming from anywhere. This is how I decided to call our descending order. So when I pass this value, I'm gonna either pass this string, descending, or I'm gonna pass string like that, ascending. So it's just my choice. You can actually change it to something else. You can type it up, say descending, the whole word, or ascending. It's up to you. I'm just choosing this. So if sort order is descending, so now I need to put a question mark. And I'm gonna say our query is gonna look like that. So query, and we're gonna do order by descending. And inside parentheses, the same thing. And here between these two statements, I'm gonna put a colon, and our statement is ready to go. So the way it's gonna work, we're gonna check if sort order is descending, so we have two equal signs. Then we're gonna sort our data by descending order. Otherwise, if anything else is coming, it doesn't matter if it's ascending or it's empty of anything else, it's gonna be ascending order. Our first case is ready. Let's just copy it, and we're gonna modify it for last name. And here I'm gonna change it to last name. And same thing here. Next is going to be phone number. So I'm going to replace this with phone number. And I'm going to do the same thing here. In a database we call it phone. So same here. And the last one, let's do the address. I'm going to copy it and paste. Control C, Control V. And let's change it to address. So we also need to do something inside our default block, and the code inside the default block is going to be executed if this column does not equal to one of these values. So if we're passing anything else beside those four values, this block is going to be executed. So our default sort can be a sort by ID. So we're going to type query equals query order by. And here it's gonna be sorted by ID. Let me save it, Control S. So at this point, our data is filtered by this value and it's sorted by these two values. Now we're gonna use this page index and page size. Let's make some space. Let's create a new variable. We're gonna call it one-page context query. And here we're gonna use two special methods. So let's type first query dot, and we're gonna use our skip method. And our next method will be take. Page size is right, and this is how many records we're gonna take from our database. And this method requires the number of records that we're gonna skip before we take this number of records. So the way we calculate it, we're gonna multiply this page size by page index. So let's think about it. The page index starts always with 0. Say if it's page number 1, so page index 0, we're gonna multiply, let's say, page size 5 by 0, it's gonna be 0, so we're gonna skip 0 records, and after that we're gonna take 5 records. So if we have second page, so we're gonna take number 1 multiplied by 5, it's gonna be 5, so we're gonna skip 5 records here, and we're gonna take again 5 records, so we're gonna go to our second page. So at this point, it's time for us to call the database and get the data. Let's create a new variable, and let's call it page context result. And we're gonna use this variable, onepage context query. And we're gonna use method toList async. Here we need to await it, so we're gonna add this await operator. So this call is going to be asynchronous. Now if I point on this variable, as you can see, this is a type of list, so list of our contact objects. And at this point we are ready to pass this data back to our controller, and from our controller it should send data back to our Angular application. Let me go back. Now there is one more thing we need to do before we send the data back. We also need to find the total number of records, because when we display our data in our Angular application, we need to know how many records total we have. So let's add some comments here so we know what exactly we are doing. So this is our query to get data for one page. Let me just put it here so it's still a query. So this line, we're gonna say the query is executed and we're getting data from the database now. We're gonna create another variable. Let's call it total count. And we're gonna use this query, the original one. So we're gonna say query count async. So let me start typing count async, because we need to execute it asynchronously, and here we need to await it too. Let's add a comment. Query is executed, getting total number of records. Now at this point we need to pass a couple pieces of data. We need to pass those records for that page, and we also need to pass this total count number. Let's create a new class, and it's going to be a DTO, so data transfer object. Let me go to Solution Explorer, and we have our folder DTOs. So we have this contact DTO, let's just look at it. So this is the model we're using to send our data back. And we're still gonna use this model, but we still need to create a new model. Let's call it contact page DTO. So I'm gonna right click on this folder DTOs, and I'm gonna say add class. And like I said, I'm gonna call it contact page DTO. Enter. And it's a public class. So let's add just two properties here. So I'm going to type prop, and I'm going to press tab. So the first property is going to be a type of integer, so I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to press tab again, and I'm going to call it context total count. I'm going to press enter twice, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to type prop, and the type is going to be a list. So I'm going to start typing list, triangle bracket. Let's put two of them. And inside I'm gonna say contact DTO. I'm gonna press tab, and let's call it page context. And again enter. Let me save it. Now we're gonna use this model to send data back to our Angular application. Let's go back to our contact service. And right here I'm gonna create a new object. So let me put a comment actually. I'm gonna say create object. Contact page DTO. I'm gonna say var contact page DTO equal new contact page DTO parentheses. So we created an object. Let's populate with data. So I'm gonna say contact page DTO dot context total count, and it's gonna be equal total count. So right here, and same thing for the page context property. Page context result. So it's right here. Now it's underlining because this type is the list of contact objects. And if we look here, it's a list of contact DTOs. So we need to convert our list of contacts to a list of DTOs. So we already have a mapper, so we use it right here. So let's use it. And we built this myMapper class in the previous videos. So let's just look really quick how it looks. So we have just one class here, and we have just two methods, toContactDTO and toContactsDTO list. Let me go back. So here we're gonna say myMapper dot toContactDTO list, and in parentheses, I put semicolon right away, we're gonna put this value. After we created this object and populate it with data, we can just return it back to our controller. So let me just copy it, and I'm gonna remove all of it and paste that value. So let me save it. It's underlying, and it's because we need to adjust the return type. So this is our contact page DTO object, because right now it says we need to return the list of contact DTO's objects. So we need to replace it with our contact page DTO object. Now it looks good. Let me save it, and let's go back to our controller. We still have this method is being underlined, and the reason for that, because we need to list this method inside our iContact service interface. So let me go back to our contact service, and here I'm gonna copy the definition of our method. So I'm gonna copy everything starting from this task word. So I'm gonna copy it, and I'm gonna open our interface right here, and I'm gonna put it right below this get all contacts method. It doesn't matter where I put it, but I'm gonna just put it right next to it so we can see the difference. And at the end I need to put a semicolon. So I'm gonna save it, Control S. Let's go back to our context controller. As you can see, we don't have any errors now. So let me test this. So I'm gonna start our Web API project, and I'm getting this Swagger interface. So as you can see, we have this new endpoint contacts by page. I'm gonna expand it and press try it out. As you can see, I have 5 fields that I need to fill. So for page index, let's just press 0, and page size, let's just get 3 records. It's gonna be our page size. And let's sort it by first name, and sort order, it's gonna be ascending, and filter value, we won't have anything. Let me press execute. As you can see, we get 3 records. Now we're getting also the total number of records, so it's 1003. And as you can see, it's also sorted by first name. So just to make sure the sorting is working correctly, let me change it to last name. And let's change sort order to descending. Let me again press execute. Now we have 3 records, but it's completely different data because we first sorted it in the descending order, and as you can see, we did it also by last name. So this data is coming from the end of the list. Let's check if our filter is working. So as you can see, we have last name Young and here last name Young. Let me put filter value, this last name, and I'm gonna use all lowercase. Execute. We now have only records with the last name Young. We are done configuring our .NET Web API, and now let's go back to our Angular application and start modifying how we're getting data using that endpoint. This is our Angular application, and it's still configured with client-side pagination, sorting and filtering. Let's run it to make sure it still works. I'm gonna type ngserve space -o, and it's gonna open a browser. I'm gonna select contacts. As you can see, we get the data. Let me open the developer tools. I'm on the network tab. Let me refresh the page. As you can see, we're getting all contacts, and we're getting all 1003 records. Let's go back to VS Code and let's look at our service. So I'm gonna open the services folder, and this is our contact service TS file. This is where we get the data. Let's create a new method where we're gonna get the data just for one page. Let me just copy paste it, and we're gonna modify it. Control C, Control V, and let's call it get contacts by page. Now our URL is gonna be different. As you remember, let's go back, and here we call our endpoint contacts by page. Here I'm gonna change it to contacts by page. This method is going to take 5 parameters. First is going to be page index, and the type is going to be number. Next one, page size, and the same type. And we're going to have 3 string values: sort column, sort order, and filter value. We now need to pass all these parameters with our call back to our API service. And the way we're going to do it, we're going to put a comma here, and it's going to be an object, and we're going to type params, colon, and here we're going to create a new object, HTTP params, and we're going to use a set method, and we need to pass 2 values. The first one is going to be a string that we define here, so we're going to call it page index, comma. So this is the name of our query parameter, and this is the value. So I'm going to just copy and place it right here. This is our page index, so we need to add now page size. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say set page size, comma, and page size. Now we need to do the same thing with the rest, but to see it better, let's just place them underneath each other. So I'm gonna copy paste this 3 times. Control C, Control V, Control V, Control V, and I'm gonna just replace it. This is all we need to do here. Let me save it, Control S. And now let's go to our context component and modify it there. So let's start with our TypeScript file. First, let's create a few properties here. So the first one we're going to call total records count, and it's going to be type of number. And let's initialize it with 0. The next is going to be page index. It's going to be number. And our initial page to load is going to be 0, so it's going to be the first page with index 0. Page size, same number. And our initial load can be with 5 records on a page. Let's put 5. Our sort order, it's going to be string. And here we can pass anything we want. Let's just pass ascending. So as you remember, we configured in our web API, if we are passing descending, it's going to be ordered by descending. But if you pass anything else, it's going to be ordered by ascending. So it doesn't matter what we are passing here, ascending or the full word ascending or just one letter A, it's still going to be sorted by ascending order. Let's create sort column. It's also going to be string. And let's sort it by first name when we just load our project. We need to create one more property, and it's going to be filter value. It's going to be string. And the initial value is going to be just an empty string. Let me save it. Let me close here and scroll down. Here inside our ngOnInit method, we are calling this method update data source, and this is where we're getting our data. So let me scroll all the way there. And this is the method where we get our data in the service. Let's modify it. First of all, let's create a new method, and it's going to be our initial method where we download data from our web API. Let's call it initial load. Inside this method, we're going to call our service. So we're going to say this, and this is our context service. And inside we have our method getContextByPage, and we need to pass those 4 arguments. So in parentheses, I'm going to say this, and it's going to be page index, and this is the property that we just created right here. So next one is going to be page size, sort column, sort order, and the filter value. So we're going to subscribe to this method. Let's actually move it to the next line. So I'm going to press dot subscribe parentheses. Let me just put right away semicolon, and inside parentheses is going to be an object, and we're going to have 3 blocks. The first block is going to be next colon, and we're going to get some data. We can call it anything we want. I'm going to just call it data. And when we get our data, we're going to do something here. Next block is going to be an arrow block, colon. And we can call it again anything we want. I'm just going to call it ERR, arrow function. And this is the block where we can handle our arrow. And the last block is going to be complete block, colon. And we just have empty parentheses here. And again, arrow function. And here, if there's an error, we're gonna just console log it, and I'm gonna say error. Let me save it, and here I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna console log it, and I'm gonna type, let's just say initial data loaded successfully. Let me save it. Now here inside our next block, when we get the data, it's going to be similar what we did in our update data source. Let me copy these 2 lines and we're going to modify it. Control C, and I'm going to place it here. So as you remember, our data changed. So when we get our data, it's actually going to be not a list of our contacts. It's going to be an object with a list of data and with the total record count. To make sure we handle it properly, let's create an interface. Let me save it first, Control S. Let me go to our interfaces folder. So we already have one interface contact.ts file. So this is our contact interface. Let's create one more. I'm gonna right click on this interfaces folder, new file, and I'm going to call it page contacts.ts for the file name. Don't forget this extension TS, so it indicates that it's TypeScript file, so enter. And here I'm gonna say export interface, and I'm gonna call it page contacts, curly braces. And inside I'm gonna have 2 properties. The first one, we're gonna call it contacts total count, and it's gonna be number, comma. And our next property is gonna be page contacts, and the type is gonna be an array. And we already have our contacts interface, so we're gonna say it's gonna be an array of our contacts. I need an import statement, so if I click here, as you can see now I have an import statement, and now this interface knows where to find this interface contact. So let me save it, and let me go back to our contacts component TS file. Now this data is coming with 2 properties inside. Let's see if we can see it. So data dot, as you can see, it gives us a type of contact, and it's not what we want, so we actually need to go back to our service. As you can see here, when we get our data, the data is being converted in this contact type data. Since we have our new interface, we can modify the type, and our type is gonna be page contacts. As you can see, now I have one more import statement here. Let me save it, and if I go back, if I remove this dot and press it again, now I have 2 completely different properties. So we need page contacts, so this is a list of our contacts here. And now when we create our data source object, we're using this new data, this is going to be here. It's just being delivered a little differently, so the rest, this should be the same. And also let's extract the total number of records. So we're gonna say this total records count, and we're gonna say data dot contacts total count. Let me put semicolon and let me save it. From our ng on init method, let me comment this out, and now we can call this new method. So I'm gonna say this initial load, and let me save it, and let's try it, see what happens. Let me refresh the page. As you can see, we're getting data just for 1 page. Let me click it, and let's look at our response. As you can see, we're getting only 5 records. let's look at the headers tab. And here we are passing page index 0, page size 5, sort by first name. It's being sorted by first name, as you can see here. Our sort order is ascending, and this is how it's being sorted. And our filter value is nothing. Even though our data is being loaded, here it doesn't look right. It says 0 of 0. And since we have our total count number, we can use that number to change how this is going to be looking. Let's do it in the next step. Let's go back to our VS Code. Let's look at our other method. Here in a complete block, we are creating our paginator and we are tying to our paginator in our template. So this is where we have our view child statement. It's actually this first one. And let me open our HTML template. Let me close this. And if we scroll all the way down, this is where our paginator is located. So let me grab this line and bring it to our initial load method. And I'm gonna place it inside our complete block. Control V. Let me save it. And now we need manually to go to our template and set one of the properties, it's called length, to the value of that total records count variable. So I'm gonna place it right here. Let me save it, Control S. And let's look at our application. As you can see, now we have this number 1003 and it says we have records 1 through 5 of 1003. In the next step, let's configure our buttons to go to next page, previous page, last page, and the first page. Let's go back to VS Code. Somehow we need to capture what page we're on. We also need to capture the page size that we selected. And Angular material makes it really easy for us. We can create an event page and we can call it anything we want. I'm gonna call it onPageChange. And I'm gonna pass the data about this event. So I'm gonna start with the $, event. I'm gonna save it here and our application is gonna break. Control S, because we need to create this method. Let me copy it. Control C. Let's go back to our TS file. And I'm gonna create this method right here. Let me remove this $, and we need to show type. It's gonna be page event. I'm gonna click it here, and as you can see I have an import statement, page event, right here. It's coming from this paginator package. Now let's console log this value and see what it gives us. Console.log, and I'm gonna put event here. Let me save it. Let's go back to the application. Let me clear it. And let me refresh the page. Now I'm gonna click on this arrow. As you can see, we're getting an object with length, page index, page size, and previous page index. We're not going to be using this previous page index because we only care about the page index that we are on. And we don't need this length property that is coming from this paginator because every time we get data from our Web API, we're going to manually update this data. So let's use these two values, page index and page size, to get this data and to display it on the screen. Back to VS Code. We don't need this console log, let me delete it, Control X. And now I'm gonna grab this data from this event. And I'm gonna use the data to get the data for that page. So let's use our properties. So I'm gonna say page index. And it's gonna be event dot page index, semicolon. The next one is gonna be page size. Same thing, event dot page size, semicolon. Let me save it. And after we have these values, page index and page size, let's call our service again, and we're gonna do it in a new method. Let's call it getContextByPage. And we're gonna call this method from here. Now we don't need to pass these values as arguments because we assign those values to these properties, page index and page size, and we can access it anywhere inside our context component TS file. So here I'm gonna create a similar block of code. So I'm gonna just copy it and we're gonna modify it. Control C, Control V. Now this part is going to be exactly the same. We're gonna get the data and this data is going to be displayed in our template. The only thing we need to change, we're going to remove this paginator because the paginator was already configured, so we don't need to do it again. So I'm going to press Ctrl X. Let me save it, Ctrl S. And I'm also going to change this console log statement. I'm going to just say page data loaded successfully. Let me save it again, and let's go back to our application and see if it works. So let me refresh it. So we start with our first page. Let me press next page. As you can see, we have our second call, and in our response we have 5 records. And in our header, as you can see in our call, we are using page index 1 and page size 5. Let's press it again. Let's look at this call, and now we have again page index 5 and page size 5. Let's change to 10. Let's look at this call, and again here we have page size, so page index 1, so the same page, but the page size just changed. Let me change it back. Let's go to the last page. Let me look here, and the last page index is 200, and Angular material calculated this number for me because we know what the total number. So if we divide it by 5 by the page size, it's going to be 200. Our server-side pagination is completed. Let's now move to our sorting. As you can see, right now we have these errors, but it's not working. Nothing is happening. We again need somehow to capture this event, and Angular material makes it again easy for us. Let's go back to VS Code. And here inside our table tag, let's create another event, and it's called methSortChange. And let's call it onSortChange. Parentheses, and again we need to pass the data about this event. So it's going to be $event. Let me save it. And we need to create this method inside our TypeScript. So let's go back to context component TS, and I'm going to create this method under this getContextByPage method. Let's do the same thing, remove this $, and the type of this parameter is going to be sort. So I need to bring a package. So our package is now right here. Let's console log it and see what kind of data we're getting. Let me save it. And let's go back to our application, refresh it. And let me click on this arrow. So as you can see, we're getting an object with 2 properties. One is active and one is direction. Let's click one more time. This time again it's first name and direction is descending. Let's try the last name, same thing, last name ascending and last name descending. Let's go back to VS Code. We're gonna use those properties to populate our data inside our class. So we're gonna say this sort column equals, as you remember it was called active. Let me see what kind of type. So this property is string and our property is string too. So we don't need to cast it to string. So next one is gonna be sort order, event, and direction. As you can see, the type of this direction property is sort direction, so we need to cast it. Let's convert it to string, parentheses. And also, when we start sorting it, we don't want to stay on the same page. We want to sort all data and start with page 1. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna set our page index to 0. And after we set these properties, we can call again our method getContextByPage. Let me copy it here. Paste it here, Ctrl S. And let's go to our application, refresh page. And let me click on first name first, last name. As you can see, the sort is changing. Let me click again, phone number. And the phone number is not working. We need to fix that. Let's look at the address. Let's understand why phone number is not working. So as you can see, we're getting active phone number. Let's go back to VS Code. So here we are setting our sort column to our property active value, but for some reason we are not getting it for the phone number. So let's look at our web API really quick. Let's go to our context service. And here, as you can see, I misspelled phone number. So that's why when we get this phone number sort column, it doesn't recognize it. So we need to change this to H. Let me save it and let me reload it. Let's go back to VS Code. We don't need to change anything else here. Let's go to our application. Let me refresh it. So here now, if I click on phone number, it works. Now let's see how our sorting works with pagination together. So let's sort it by first name. And if I go to the next page, the sorting is the same. Now when I click on last name, it should start again with page 1. Let's see. It doesn't work how it's supposed to be. So what we need to do to fix it, we need to go to our VS Code and we need to go to our component HTML file. And here inside our Met Paginator tag, we need to bind that page number that we are getting to the page index property of this paginator. So let's do that. Square brackets, page index. So it's a built-in property, and I'm gonna say page index. And this property is gonna be coming from our TypeScript file. So let me save it. And let's see if it works how it's supposed to be. I'm gonna refresh it, and I'm gonna sort by last name. And I'm gonna go to page 3, and now I'm gonna sort by first name, and we're gonna see if it's gonna reset to page 1 again. First name. As you can see, now we have records 1 through 5. So if I start paging again, let's go to address. It goes back to page 1. Our pagination and sorting are now working together. Let's now start configuring our search functionality. Back to VS Code. Let's go to our TypeScript file. Here we already have a method, apply filter. Inside this apply filter method, we're getting the value from the search bar. And line 138, we're using client-side filtering to search for this value. We don't need this line anymore. Let me comment it out. Let's make some space. Let's set our filter value to the value that is coming from our template. And again, when we start filtering, we want to start with page 0. So we're gonna set our page index to 0. And after that, we need to call our method again to get the data. Let me save it and see if it works. Refresh. It looks like we have a few Adams. Let me type Adam. We're doing our search by first name and last name, and that's why we have 4 records. We have 2 records with first name Adam and 2 records with last name Adams. If we add 1 letter S, it's actually gonna go down to 2 records. So our search functionality is working. Let's check if it works well together with our sorting and pagination. As you can see, the paginator works correctly. Let me just get a few more records here. So I'm gonna start with AD. So we have 19 records total. Let me page through them. Let me sort the data by last name. Still 19 records. Sort descending. Works correctly. First name, phone number, and address. It looks like our search functionality is working properly, but there is still one problem with what we are doing right now. Let me clear it and show you what I mean. Every time I type a letter, we have a call to our web API. So if I type Adam, we have 4 calls. And if I start removing letters, we have again 4 calls. So every time we have an event, and our event is a key up event, let's look at it. Right here, we call this method, and every time we call this method, we get the data. It doesn't matter how fast we type, we're still gonna call our web API 4 times. It's probably not the most efficient way to get data, and that is why we're gonna configure so-called debouncing. If you're not familiar with this term, let me Google it really quick. One of the ways to configure the debounce time is using RxJS library. But to fully understand how it works, we can actually do it ourselves without using any libraries. Let's go back to VS Code and do it. Let's first create one more property inside this class. Let me scroll all the way up. And let's call it previous filter value. It's going to be a string. And it's going to be an empty string to start with. Control S to save. Let's go back. Now let's use it here. We're going to say this previous filter value. And we're going to assign this value to this value. So here it's going to be filter value, semicolon. So at this point, we're going to get the value from our search bar, and we're going to assign it to this property. So we have this constant that had the same value as this previous filter value property. So they have the same value. Now we're going to use a standard setTimeout function, and it's a JavaScript function, semicolon. And inside, we're going to have another function. Then it's going to be executed after a certain amount of time. So right here, we're going to put a comma. And this value is in milliseconds. So let's put 1000 milliseconds. So it's going to be 1 second. So whatever is going to happen inside, it's going to happen in 1 second. Inside here, we're going to have an if statement. And as a condition, we're going to check if this filter value equals to the previous value. You can save it so it looks better. So we're going to set our filter value property to this filter value that is coming from here, from this constant. And after that, we're also going to set our page index to 0. And after that, we're going to call our method again. Get context by page. Let me save it. And let's test how it works. Let's refresh it. Let me clear it. And let me type Adam really quick. As you can see, we have one call. Let's look at our URL. The last filter value is Adam. If I now remove one letter and wait for 1 second, we're going to have another call. And if I remove 3 letters really quick, we still have just one call. Let's go back to our code and add one more thing. If we start doing multiple searches, we might create a memory leak. And what it means, we're going to create a bunch of objects that are going to be sitting in the memory. Let's make sure it doesn't happen. Let's create one more property. And we're going to call it Debounce. And we're going to say it's going to be a type of any. Let me save it. Let's go back. And here we're going to use this debounce property. This for this setTimeout method. And we're going to clear this setTimeout by using another JavaScript method, clear timeout. And in parentheses, we're going to put this debounce property. Let me save it. I think this looks good. And before we finish this video, let me do one more thing. If we look at Angular material documentation, I'll go to Table, Pagination, and I'm going to look at the code, TypeScript file. Here they recommend to use ng after viewing it lifecycle hook instead of ng on init. Our application works with ng on init, but to follow this guide, let's just change ng on init to this ng after viewing it. So to make it easier, let's implement this interface. So Control C, let's go back. And here, instead of implementing on init, let me replace it with implement after viewing it. It's underlined because we need to bring a package, import from Angular core. And now this is underlined because we don't have this method in here. So let me point it, quick fix. And I'm going to click on implement interface after view init. So after I click that, this method will be created here. So it's right here. So instead of this initial load inside this ng on init, let me Control X. I'm going to place it right here. Let me just delete it. I'm going to also remove that package. We don't need it anymore. It's right here. Let me save it. And let's run our application one more time. Our paginator is working. Our sorting is working as well. Let's go back to the next page. Let's start sorting by different column. It goes to the first page. Let's filter our data. I'm gonna type Adam. It works. And let's see if debouncing is still working. I'm gonna delete all 4 letters. As you can see, we get just one call to our web API. I hope this video was helpful and thank you for watching.